Okay. My name is Carlton Cartwright. Um, I'm the founder and executive director for the Children's Coalition Incorporated. Today's date is January 18th, 2020. And sir, what is your name?
I'm Mike Budd.
Okay, Mike. And let me just. Where were you born?
I was born in Beloit, Kansas in 1944.
Okay, and what branch of the service were you in?
I was in the Army.
When is your birthday?
8/26/44, August 26th.
Okay. What is your current address?
My current address is 2047 Newcastle C, the letter C, in Boca Raton, Florida, 33434.
Okay, and tell me what branch again, and what rank were you when you separated?
I was in the Army,
Mm-hmm.
in the Signal Corps, and I was an E5, Spec 5 when I left the Army.
Okay. Where did you serve?
I did basic. I grew up in Kansas,
Mhm.
so I was drafted from my hometown of Emporia. I did basic training at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, as my father had done during
Right.
World War II. Then I went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, for training, and from there, in November 1st, 1969, I went to Vietnam and was there for 365 days until the end of October 1970. And I was stationed at Long Binh in Vietnam, and then I came home and was stationed for the rest of my time in the Army at Fort Leavenworth, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. And then I got out.
Okay. Were you drafted or enlisted?
Both, actually. That's what I was going to explain to you on the form that I filled out. First, I was drafted. 1st of July, 1968.
Mm-hmm.
And then at the end of basic training, they told us, well, you can be in a combat unit and you'll be in Vietnam by Christmas, or you can enlist for 3 years and we'll send you off to learn how to fix IBM key punch machines.
Okay.
So that'll probably keep you out of combat if you're lucky. So that seemed like a real easy decision. So I then enlisted. So that's why I say I was drafted and then I enlisted.
Okay.
Long answer to a short question.
That's okay. That's fine. That's fine. That's not an issue. Where were you? Okay, you said you were living in where when you enlisted? You enlisted, right?
Well, I was already in the Army. I'd been through basic training when I enlisted. Yeah, I was drafted.
Uh-huh.
At the end of basic training, they told us, me and all the other college graduates,
Right.
you can you're all going to be in Vietnam by Christmas, as Christmas '68,
Right.
or you can enlist for 3 years now, and we will send you off for 6 months or a year of training and probably keep you out of combat. And that's what happened.
Okay.
They all
Okay.
said yes. Sign me up. Where do I sign up?
Okay. All right. Please forgive me because I've been
Sure, no
making
problem.
sure that everything's working right. All right. So you were drafted.
I was drafted.
Okay. So did you think about going into a different service, even at the moment that you were drafted? Like, well, I don't want to do the Army. I want to go do the Air Force.
Not really, no. My dad had been in the Army,
Uh-huh.
and at that particular time, no, it was not a question of which service I was going to go into. It was a question of, do I really want to do this or not?
Okay. What would have been the alternative?
Well, the alternative, not one that I well, the alternative was evading, not just trying to avoid the draft,
Right.
but going to Canada or going to prison.
Okay.
That was the alternative, and I wasn't prepared to do either one of those things.
Okay.
Or going to England or going to, I mean, I wasn't going to do those things. So, but that was I never really thought seriously about enlisting because this is part of my story, is I was just avoiding. I was avoiding thinking about the draft.
Okay.
The war had been going on for 3 years, and I was in college, and then I was in graduate school. They drafted me I was in graduate school when they drafted me. And so I was just kind of in denial about the whole thing.
I'm curious, did you have any siblings? Did you have any other brothers?
No brothers. 2 sisters, 2 younger sisters.
Oh, okay. All right. So you weren't the only child.
Right.
Okay. All right. Well, anyway. All right. Moving right along. Tell me about basic training. Where did you go?
Basic training was at Fort Leonard Wood, Missouri, in southern Missouri in the Ozarks. It was, as I said, it was where my father had gone to basic training during World War II.
Right.
And it was really, really hot. In fact, just before we were ready to go out on bivouac.
Right.
That is, out camping. In the middle of August, in southern Missouri, it was really bloody hot. And they decided to call it off because the group that had gone out, the basic training group that had gone out right before us, some guy died.
Ooh.
So that got their attention, and we were just lucky, so we didn't even have to go out.
How hot? Do you remember?
100, 105, you know, and not as humid as South Florida, but humid.
Right, yeah.
Enough so you can get heat stroke and, you know,
exactly.
sunstroke and all of that. Marching with those full packs, you know, for miles and miles in 100-degree weather. It's,
right.
You know.
Tough. Boy.
Yeah.
Tell me about your instructors.
Tough drill instructor. I remember, you know, I grew up in a little town in Kansas. I barely knew any black kids. And my drill instructor was black. That didn't really make a big difference, but he was a good drill instructor.
Yeah.
He was, which is what drill instructors are supposed to be like. And he was really good, but he was on us all the time. What I remember mostly because I was older than most of the other draftees, I was out of shape. I'd been in college, I'd been drinking beer, I'd been studying in the library.
Right, yeah.
So most of these guys are 17, 18, 19. I'm 23.
Wow.
So I really had to get in shape. That's what I remember, is getting in shape. I was in better shape then at the end of basic training than I had been for years. The drill instructor was, no, I mean, he was doing all the things that drill instructors are supposed to do, yelling at you.
Right.
But the other thing I remember is cleaning the floors. You know, I became an expert at washing and waxing floors. Hey, you know, what can I say?
Right. I got you. Okay.
Anyway, it was
How long was basic training anyway? How long was
8
it?
weeks. 8 weeks.
Okay, 8 weeks.
Yeah, and then it was at the end of that that they got us all together. They pulled out all the guys who had college. This is summer of 1968.
Right.
They pulled out all the guys who'd had college degrees or some college. And they said, okay, here's your orders. You're going to go to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for, you know, artillery.
Right.
Or you're going to go to this place for armor, or this place for infantry. Here's your, and you're going to be, as I said, you're going to be in Vietnam by Christmas. Or here you can enlist right now, and you can go to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, in the Cushy Signal Corps,
Right.
and, you know, learn all this stuff because we know you're smart enough to learn it. So my guess is almost everybody in that group took the opportunity because it felt like a matter of life and death.
Okay.
And it probably was for a lot of people, or at least life or injury or something.
Right.
So yeah, am I answering your question?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. After, where'd you go after basic training?
I went to Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to learn how to fix IBM key punch machines.
Wow.
You remember those? Remember the old
Yeah.
cards? Do not fold, spindle, or mutilate.
Yeah.
Those kind of things.
Yeah.
Well, they taught me in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey. Civilian IBM employees taught me how to fix these machines.
Uh-huh.
And there's a story that goes with this. It's very important that I want everybody to know.
Okay.
Because it was my introduction to what Eisenhower called the military-industrial complex, right?
Okay.
All the big companies that make money off of warfare.
Yeah.
And you wouldn't think of IBM as being one of those. They're not in general, they're not a military contractor. But in this situation, my story and what I learned gradually is they needed all the Army payrolls for all of Southeast Asia, that is Vietnam, and we had people in Cambodia when I was there, Thailand, all these other places. All these Army payrolls were done on these IBM key punch machines.
Okay.
Usually they would have IBM civilians contracted to fix these things and run them and everything.
Yeah.
But these civilians were not about to go to Vietnam, to a combat zone. So that meant that the Army had a multi-million-dollar contract with IBM to train all of us soldiers. And of course they had to have people with some college because it was a fairly skilled thing. In fact, IBM would employ a lot of these guys who had learned to fix these key punch machines in the Army.
Right.
After they got out, they could, if they couldn't get another job, that's what they would do.
Right.
They'd go to work for IBM.
Right.
So it was a great deal. IBM was making money on both ends.
Right.
We were training people at the taxpayers' expense. So all of these people. So I was in training for more than 6 months.
Okay. Wow.
And some people were, it was closer to a year. It was, well, I got there in September of 1968,
Right.
and I didn't go to Vietnam until November of '69.
Okay.
So that was more than a year that I was in Fort Monmouth. And yeah, it was easy stuff. It was, frankly, I didn't care anything about it. I didn't want it. I was not interested in doing it. I had a career ahead of me. I was planning to be a professor. I was working on a master's and a PhD when I got drafted. So the whole thing felt very alienating to me. I wasn't like these, a 17 or 18 or 19-year-old guy.
Uh-huh.
But
What were you, what were you trying to get a master's and a PhD in?
film and media studies, which is what I became a professor in Florida.
Okay.
After that, right. But there's a whole long story on that, and I don't want, but I want to focus on
Okay, fine.
the
I'm just
military
curious.
experience.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, so I guess what I'm saying is the Army training that I got after basic training was my introduction to the military-industrial complex.
Okay.
Because when I got to Vietnam, I'm jumping ahead a little bit here.
That's okay.
When I got to Vietnam, the person who was the clerk there, who was an E4, the same as I would become, who was deciding where everybody was going to go. This was in Da Nang. I came into in-country in Da Nang. He said, there's basically, there in all of Southeast Asia, we need about 5 or 6 people who do what you do.
Oh.
Well, back in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey,
Right.
they're turning out 25 or 30 people every month
Yeah.
who know how to do this stuff.
Right.
So a lot of these guys who come to Vietnam with this very expensive training provided by this multi-million-dollar contract by IBM are going to end up driving trucks, filling sandbags, doing what I ended up doing, becoming a clerk.
Yeah.
Because while I was waiting back in Fort Monmouth, New Jersey, to go to Vietnam, and there's a lot of other things I can tell you about that. But during that time, sorry, what was my point here about this? My point was that I was waiting to go to Vietnam, and this is a great Army story. I don't know if this happens in the Air Force. I'm a guy who's I have to tell you the complications of the story. They're so important for a picture of military life, especially during the Vietnam War. My wife and I she had been trying to get pregnant, actually to get me out of the draft.
Oh, okay.
In 1967 and 68. Obviously that was unsuccessful.
Okay.
But we still wanted to have a child
Right.
after I got into the Army. But she started having miscarriages. We eventually were successful and had children. But she started having miscarriages, and her I didn't know about this at the time, but basically her mother wrote to their congressman to say, would you please not have my son-in-law sent to Vietnam when his wife may be having a baby or maybe having a miscarriage. I didn't even know about this until the first sergeant calls me in, and he says, what's all this about a congressman and not wanting, blah, 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 blah. I didn't know anything about this.
Right, yeah.
But what it ended up was, that's why I got, after I finished my training, I'm hanging out there at Fort Monmouth, and I'm kind of in limbo, because they don't want to send me to Vietnam, because the congressman is keeping track of this. It turned out my father-in-law worked for the VA. He was very high up in the VA. So he had some pull. The point of this story is I ended up I got a military occupational specialty of clerk.
Right.
So I ended up with 2 MOSs.
Oh, okay.
Besides this fancy
What's an MOS?
military occupational specialty.
Right.
I had this fancy one that I never used after 6 or 8 months of training to be an IBM key punch repairman. The one that I ended up using in Vietnam was clerk typist. And that turned out to be a great lifesaver for me. When I did get to Vietnam in November of 1969. Is this making sense?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. It's a little it's a little jumbled in terms of
fine.
time. But everything's, anyway, the life lesson that I took from this was my understanding about how this huge war machine that had been cranked up,
Right.
in Vietnam, how it worked, how everybody was, it was just, there were millions of people involved, civilians and military people alike.
Right.
So that was, I think, the lesson from me is, there's a lot of people making a lot of money on this, a lot of big corporations making a lot of money.
On the war machine.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And they're not all arms manufacturers. Like I said,
Right.
IBM.
Exactly. Oh yeah. The outside.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So IBM had a great deal because they're getting all these trained people trained by taxpayer money, and they're getting paid to train them.
Right.
And almost none of us ever used that skill in the military.
Okay.
Some of them used it in civilian law.
For private corporation.
Exactly.
Got
it. Yeah. So that was the beginning. I grew up in a little town in Kansas.
Mm-hmm.
My father had been in World War II, but part of the lesson was that I was starting to learn was this is not World War II.
Right.
This is not your father's army.
Right.
This is not fighting Hitler. Who is it you're fighting?
Right.
So I started asking a bunch of questions at that time
Uh-huh.
that I had been naive and stupid enough, even though I thought I was really smart.
Uh-huh.
I was naive enough to need a lesson, and getting drafted and sent to Vietnam was the lesson that I needed.
Okay. Okay.
That's certainly the lesson. I didn't know it at the time,
Uh-huh.
but it really changed my life.
All right. That's a great story.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. So after tech school,
Yeah.
24 weeks.
Yeah.
Approximately,
It was, and waiting around.
What year was that exactly?
Well, I started in probably September of '68, and it was sometime in early to mid '69 that I finished.
Uh-huh.
But then, as I said, I got this, this weird kind of put in this limbo. They weren't going to send me to Vietnam because the congressman was asking questions about this, but I was already finished with my training. So I'm just hanging around there, and what am I getting? For the first few weeks, I'm washing dishes. I'm getting put on KP.
Okay. This is after training.
After training, but I'm just hanging around, just waiting.
Mm-hmm.
So the first sergeant looks at the situation, and the captain, who's running this training company.
Uh-huh.
They say, "Okay, we've got this clerk in the office,
Right.
the company office, and of course the Army, in all its wisdom, drafted somebody and trained them to be a clerk typist, somebody who, I don't know if he had a high school education, but he didn't know how to type,
Mm-hmm.
and he didn't know how to spell.
Mm-hmm.
And here he's got this guy hanging around here washing dishes, who's got a college degree, and he's got 36 hours of graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
Why don't we bring this guy in here and make him the company clerk? Well, that's what they did. And so for almost 6 months, that's what I did. I was a company clerk, and I organized their files. I did all what clerk typists do.
Right.
And
so this is an additional 6 months.
Yes. But the key, as I was saying, the key was I got a second MOS, a military.
Right.
This clerk typist,
Mm-hmm.
which is what I ended up using when I got to Vietnam. They needed clerk typists.
Okay.
They didn't need anybody to fix IBM key punch machines.
Right. Okay. So where were you stationed in Vietnam?
I got in at Da Nang. This guy said to me, "I got a perfect thing for you," and it was a cushy job. I was stationed in Long Binh, Vietnam. I have been back there more recently, which is another story. The place doesn't even exist now. At the time I was there, when I got there in the beginning of November of 1969,
Right.
it was one of the largest military bases in the world.
Mm-hmm.
There were over 50,000 American troops.
Okay.
Army, Air Force, the whole thing, right there. And I was working in an air-conditioned office
Okay.
for a general, the Signal Corps general. So it was, I guess you would say, that was, if I had bad luck in getting drafted, then I had good luck when it came to getting the military, either intentionally or unintentionally, either blindly or by some wonderful thing,
Yeah.
put me in the ultimate cushy enlisted man's job,
Okay.
working in an air-conditioned office. So I worked 12-hour shifts, sometimes at night, sometimes in the daytime,
Right.
with half a dozen other people
Uh-huh.
in a message center. And this was a message center for the whole of Southeast Asia.
Wow.
Army, Air Force, Navy, Marines, the whole thing.
Mhm.
And we were processing messages. They were all on paper, moving them through there. So when Nixon sent people into Cambodia in 1970, here he is on TV saying, well, we don't have anybody in Cambodia. And here I'm looking at messages, that say, so this is my education. If you get my meaning,
I'm getting it.
I'm starting to see a pattern here.
Exactly. Yeah.
And let's call it a kind of education or a kind of disillusionment. Whatever notions I had about warfare, were rapidly being changed.
You want me to say this for you? You were seeing what was really going on.
I was seeing what was really going on.
Oh, I
That's
understand.
exactly yes.
Whatever they thought back home was your experience. It was 360 degrees.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I was. My father was in combat. He
Right.
volunteered for combat.
Right.
I was not volunteering for combat, and I was really glad not to be in combat.
Okay.
But it was a completely different war, too.
Right. Okay. So.
By the way, my experience was actually more typical than you would think. The reality of war is that, at least in the American military, only about 20% of American military personnel are actually in combat.
Okay. Yeah. Okay.
And so I was part of that 80%, and I was just lucky to be in the safest part.
Right.
But I was working these 12-hour shifts, and we'd have guard duty, like, I don't know, once or twice a month, but it wasn't. Well, it took me a while to figure this out. We were part of guard duty meant that you would go out and get in a bunker, and you'd carry all these grenade launchers and machine guns,
Right.
and all this stuff that I didn't use on a day-by-day basis.
Right. You handled all the ordnance.
All the ordnance, exactly.
You handled it.
Exactly. Okay, so, and we were ready, and we'd take our lunch out with us, our dinner out with us.
Yeah.
And we'd sit on top of the bunker, and we would eat our dinner out there, and we'd watch the bombs out several miles,
Right.
or two. But they were, big B-52 strafing runs, helicopter gunships way out. What it took me a while to understand, with my friends who had, my comrades who had been there longer than I had, was there was another line. There was another line of bunkers in front of us that was run by the ARVN, the South Vietnamese Army. So we were in little or no danger of being overrun by the North Vietnamese Army or the Viet Cong. Occasionally, not just on guard duty, there would be mortars that would come in, but that was a fairly unusual occasion. This base was like a big city,
Okay.
and the base was only about 15 miles outside of Saigon, in the south of the country, and it had been set up after the disastrous Tet Offensive of early 1968 to keep all these GIs out of Saigon, because it became clear, if it wasn't in the Tet Offensive of early 1968,
Right.
that Saigon was not safe for American troops, because there were several million Vietnamese living there, and the Viet Cong could infiltrate there. Nobody knew who was Viet Cong,
Right.
who wasn't.
Yeah.
Right? In fact, so they moved all these GIs out. Tan Son Nhut Air Base was right next door, and we're all behind all these layers of wire to keep us safe. We were like, like I said, that's where the generals and the colonels
Sheltered.
and they had the big military prison there, Long Bend Jail was there, right? Became famous during the war for other reasons. But it was a very, very strange situation because we were not supposed to leave this because even though the military didn't necessarily say this or the civilian leaders didn't say this whole thing was set up. This Long Bend military base was set up in order to keep all us from getting shot because they wanted to cut our casualties because all of these nice college boys like me, nice white college boys, are getting killed in Vietnam, and when their parents who didn't really understand who we were supposed to be fighting over there, and their kid gets injured or killed, well, their voting behavior is going to start to change. And so Nixon had to promise he was going to end the war. Well, he didn't end the war. So that was another lie. So we got another party. We got a new president. Nixon was elected while I was in training.
Right.
Spring of that gives you a little sense of
time.
That. So I started.
What year was that?
That was 68.
Okay, right. Okay.
This is the year that Martin Luther King was killed in April of that year. Bobby Kennedy was killed in June of that year. I got drafted. It was what can I say? It was a fucked up year.
Okay.
It was the worst possible year.
I understand.
But the lesson of all of this is I needed a lesson in how the world works. And I had been going to classes, being an A student, learning all these great things about media and film and everything. I loved it. I was a really great student. And all of a sudden, Uncle Sam comes calling and saying, hey, it's time to wake up. Except the lesson that Uncle Sam taught me was not the lesson that Uncle Sam thought he was going to teach me.
Or what you thought.
Or what I thought. Exactly. No, that's exactly. You got it right.
Right.
Absolutely. It was not and it certainly was not the lesson that my father learned in World War II.
Two different wars.
Absolutely.
Two different scenarios totally.
Exactly.
And I understand what you're talking about.
Where I'm going
I got a couple other questions for you, please.
Sure, yeah, please.
I mean, from basic training, from day one to through the service, so to speak, through this experience actually where you are. All right, let's do first of all, let's do the easy part. Just if you can list for me, not writing, but where's all the places that you traveled? I know you started out in
while I was in the Army.
You were drafted in Kansas.
Drafted in Kansas,
and then you went to Missouri.
Missouri for basic training.
And then where'd you go?
Then to New Jersey, Fort Monmouth, New Jersey.
Then where'd you go?
And then I went to Vietnam.
All right. Now, where'd you go in Vietnam?
Just one place.
Where's that?
I came into country in Da Nang.
Yeah.
The big air base.
Right.
Central part of the country. And then came down to Long Binh, just north of Saigon.
Okay.
Which is where I spent basically my whole 365 days there, except for I had a few days R&R in the middle of that.
Yeah, and where'd you go?
R&R. I met my wife in Hawaii and had a real honeymoon for the first time.
Wow.
Yeah, it was a few days, but it was a great R&R.
All right. Casualties from basic training. Would anybody get hurt? Anybody die in basic training?
No, not that I knew. But they were, as I said with my story about somebody dying of heat exhaustion.
Right.
Before us.
Then yes.
They were obviously.
The answer is yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was one person, and it was isolated incident.
Yeah, but that was right. That was just a week or two before we were scheduled to go out.
Okay.
On bivouac. And that's the reason they didn't send us, because they didn't want people dying in basic training.
So in tech school, anybody get hurt? Anybody?
No.
Okay, all right. In those two tech schools, so to speak, nobody got No injuries. No. Okay.
No.
Next, you carried ordnance, but you were not in combat.
Right. Yeah.
Okay.
The
Now-
whole country was a combat.
Well, this is where next question. Next question is this exactly: did you witness people who had either died or coming back from the war zone? The casualties. Period. Dead or alive.
No,
No.
no, actually, I didn't. I talked to and saw a lot of returning GIs who'd come out of the boondocks. You know, just you
The
could tell
war zone.
The war, who'd been out in the jungle. They'd been
Yeah.
out in the rainforest.
Right.
Right. Which was just a few less than a mile out beyond the wire.
Wow.
I saw a lot. I talked to a lot of those guys and got a sense of what it was like from them. But they were not the injured one. There were plenty of injured guys in the hospital there and whatever.
So,
But I didn't. It was only later
Okay.
that I would talk to people who had had those experiences, or met people who had been injured, or knew people who were killed who had actually been in combat.
you said there was a hospital where you were stationed.
Well, yeah, there was, yeah,
So, they got injuries in the war zone.
yeah.
Okay. So,
But I didn't see those guys.
you didn't see the injured.
I know, I didn't.
You didn't. Oh.
No.
Okay.
I mean, I knew what was going on. I mean,
But you said, okay, I'm shooting for clarity here. You said you talked to the guys who had been in the jungles.
Yeah.
All right. And all of them were uninjured?
Well, the guys I'm talking to
Uh-huh.
are guys who are walking around this base,
Uh-huh.
or they're at the PX,
Mhm.
or they're. I don't think I went to the bar. I don't think I went to the bar very often.
Mhm. Okay.
But I did talk to them sometimes.
Okay. And what would they tell you?
Oh, they were just strung out. They were pissed off.
Uh-huh.
They were both black and white.
Uh-huh.
Not many Latinos, not many Hispanics.
Right. Right.
And what I observed was that they were, I guess, like a lot of Americans, they were self-segregated. So the white guys are together,
Uh-huh.
and the black guys are together.
Okay.
And the black guys their consciousness has been changed in Vietnam.
Right.
They, we're talking about Muhammad Ali kind of territory.
What do you mean? Yeah.
I mean, well, Muhammad Ali was the most famous person who ever refused the draft.
Right.
And what he said at the time, and he was right, most of us didn't want to admit it, he said, I'm not going to Vietnam to try to kill yellow people,
Uh-huh.
because no Viet Cong ever called me a nigger.
Okay.
And he had been called a nigger by a lot of Americans,
Okay.
white Americans.
Right. Okay.
Anyway, that was that very. I had been, when I was in college in Kansas,
Mm-hmm.
and I was in graduate school in Boston,
Yeah.
I had been able to avoid a lot of that, of the racial politics and
Mhm.
the racial conflict.
Okay.
I knew it was going on. It was on TV all the time.
Right.
I knew that America was a racist country in some sense.
Okay.
But when the whole contradiction of America drafting mostly black guys to go out into the boonies and kill Asians, that whole thing, how to put this? Well, it's like Malcolm X said, the chickens were starting to come home to roost.
Okay.
If you know what I mean.
Yeah.
That's what was going on then.
Okay.
And so the black guys were pissed off. They're only hanging out with other black guys because they were the only ones they could trust.
Uh-huh.
None of their officers and none of their very few of their NCOs were black.
Right.
And they're getting sent out on these patrols.
Uh-huh.
They're dying and getting injured. So when I'm talking to these guys, both black and white,
Right.
I'm feeling a lot of that. I'm not experiencing day to day.
Right.
I'm in this air-conditioned office working for a general.
Mhm.
You know, it was like, it was unreal. Carl.
It was surreal.
It was surreal. What they say, you know, what you've heard. We referred to it as, when I'm going back to the United States, I'm going back to the world. There's being in Vietnam, and then there's being in the world.
Okay.
And maybe when we would start to talk to each other
Yeah.
about this, we would think, maybe we're not really in Vietnam. Maybe we're really in somewhere in Louisiana, and this is all a big hoax. It was like people who, well,
It was surreal.
it's surreal, and it's impossible to talk about my experience without talking about smoking dope,
Okay.
because that's so. At the end of a 12-hour shift, when it's just so weird, you're working in an office, and there's all this shit flying around,
Okay.
and you know that you're just barely insulated from it.
Right.
I felt like I was partly insulated from it because I already had a college degree, and they were consciously or unconsciously trying to save my life. They needed me. I had some skills that they wanted, so they were going to make sure that I didn't get killed,
Right.
accidentally or on purpose. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And here's all these working class black and white guys who are coming in out of the boonies, and these guys got that 1,000-yard stare. These guys have been through it. And I didn't find this, they didn't tell me this, but it was years later that I found out these guys were starting to mutiny against their officers.
Oh.
These guys, when their NCOs and their officers would tell them, okay, we're going to go out on an ambush patrol. And these guys would just say, no, sir, we're not going to do that. And if the NCO or the officer insisted, there would be a conflict, and if there was enough conflict, there was something called fragging. Fragmentation grenades. In the middle of the night, your lieutenant or your sergeant gets a fragmentation grenade rolled under his tent, and it's called fragging. I've just been reading a book about it. Hundreds, if not thousands, of these kinds of things went on. The United States Army, the historians are writing about this now, and I'm a historian of a different kind, but
Right.
I read a lot of history. The United States Army was breaking down. It was dysfunctional.
Right.
The social science literature says this now, the historical literature. That's one of the reasons that Nixon had to change his strategy. Because the troops on the ground, not the guys I'm working with, but these guys that I'm seeing coming in out of the boondocks, you know, who are just like, you know, well, they're self-medicating with pot, with weed.
Yeah.
But then the weed starts to get mixed with heroin.
I would say opium.
Opium?
Yeah.
In fact, I smoked what we called OJs, opium joints.
Oh.
So it started, you know, after work, hanging out. By the time I left there, 12 months later,
Yeah.
it was a good thing I left there, because I would call that experience an addiction machine. It was designed, and I wasn't I was not really in any big danger.
Right.
But all the people I know, in some ways it was a perfect situation for creating addicts, because we were trying to escape. Well, and most of these guys who are out in the boondocks
Right.
have a lot better reasons than we did for wanting to escape. And what's the best way to escape? Just stay right in that place and, you know, trip out. And the dope was really good. And the first time I ever got high was on guard duty. Now, that may sound insane, and on some level it was insane, but it was after I realized that I wasn't really in any danger.
Gotcha.
So we've got all the, we're surrounded by all of this ordnance, and we're all just completely stoned.
Mm-hmm. I hear you.
Or after work, we're hanging out in, in the hooch, and we're just telling these stories, and that's where you get that sense of
What is a hooch anyway?
a hooch. Well, hooch is just a place where you live,
Okay, gotcha. All right.
but a place where we live.
I haven't heard that in ages.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
Wait a minute.
But hooches are that's a term that's a Vietnamese term, or our version of it. But it's also where the Vietnamese lived, the farmers and the peasants, and it's the places that we destroyed with people in them, and that we would go in there if you were in the infantry, we'd go in there and burn these places down.
Right.
With or without, this is what happened with My Lai. I mean, just
With or without what?
with or without people in them. We burned down their little huts.
Okay.
They were made out of. They're like the straw, what the Seminoles make around here.
Okay.
Yeah, they were made out of biological material. They weren't made out of steel.
Oh, gotcha. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm just going down the list again, hitting this back. You were never a prisoner of war.
Nope.
Okay, so you were never in
Happy to say.
captivity. Medals and citations.
Yeah, I got. I put it on the form that I gave you. That was the weirdest thing of all, because I never felt like I deserved any medals. But I'm surrounded by all these majors and colonels who are getting their tickets punched. These guys came in for 6 months.
Yeah.
They were out in the field, supposedly. Then there were 6 months in this headquarters where I am.
Right.
There's like 40 or 50 of them out there. They're all getting bronze stars. So they had to give me a bronze star too. I was one of these clerks.
Right.
365 days of working in an air-conditioned office.
Yeah.
I got an Army Commendation Medal. I got a Vietnam Service Medal. I got a list. I only wrote 3 of them down on that form, but in looking at my DD 214, the leaving the service form, which is so important for all the benefits that you get. Just looking at that, yeah, I got I got at least three medals. But frankly, that I'm pretty cynical about the whole thing. I've still got them somewhere, the actual medals. But if I had, put it this way, if about a year after the same year I got out of the Army in 1971, several hundred American veterans went to the Capitol building, took off their medals, and threw them on the steps of the Capitol building. That's how disgusted we were. And if I had the opportunity to do that, if I had a higher consciousness, I would have done the same thing too. That's how bad it got. Anyway, that's something I would like to talk more about is medals, because I remember seeing my father's medals, and that was one of those situations with my father where I'm growing up in the 50s and 60s like all these other kids, and it was all, what did you do in the war, Daddy? Well, Daddy didn't want to talk about it because either he did things he didn't want to talk about, or it was just too traumatic for him.
Okay.
That's pretty much the way my dad was. It was completely the other way around. I didn't do anything bad myself, but I gradually came to realize when all the stuff about the massacres of Vietnamese men, you know, old people, women, and children in Vietnam, when all that came out, and that came out while I was in the military,
Yeah.
and it wasn't just didn't just happen once or twice.
Right.
And I'm not saying every American was a war criminal. That's not true either.
Right.
But it was way. We thought that we were going over there to save these people from communism.
Right.
And what it turns out is we're over there to kill as many of them as fast as we can.
Right.
And I just got disgusted by the whole thing.
Okay.
This is coming out a little bit disjointed, but
No, you're doing a great job.
okay.
Fine.
Anyway, yes, that's my feeling about medals. Okay. I always prized the medals that my father got when he was in Europe. He was in France, in Germany in World War II, but not the ones I got.
Okay. Did you ever have a problem while you were in the service staying in touch with your family?
No, not really.
Okay.
I wrote a letter home to my wife every single day, 365 letters.
But was home Hawaii or was home?
No, home was Kansas.
Okay. All right. There's a silly question here now that, did you feel pressure or stress?
Yeah, but not the stress of combat.
Just from paperwork.
Yeah, and just the stress of absorbing things that I didn't completely understand.
I got you.
It took me decades to process all this. I'm still processing.
Are you still processing?
Yeah, I still read about it.
What year did you go into service?
68.
And came out?
71.
Okay, go ahead. I didn't mean to cut you off.
Yeah. Well, let me sort of finish the story about my service.
Please.
Yeah. I smoked a lot of dope in Vietnam, and it was a very that and just the whole experience really started to turn my head around.
Okay.
And like I said, it took me a long time to process. So I'm sorry. What was the question?
About stress, pressure.
Oh, stress. Yeah. No, it was a weird kind of stress. I mean, when I got home, my wife said, "You know, you were weird when you got home from Vietnam."
Okay.
And I was weird, and I still can't quite explain how I was weird. I had just gone through a lot of changes, and well, like a lot of people who put been in the military, I wasn't in combat, but it put stress on my relationships. And eventually that marriage ended in divorce.
Okay.
And I don't think it was possible for her to understand what I went through, because I didn't understand it myself.
Right.
I hadn't been in Vietnam. I wasn't a hero. I hadn't been out there fighting. I was glad I wasn't out there fighting.
Okay.
You know, but I had a really bad conscience. I had a really guilty conscience, and coming to terms with that, understanding the implications of what I had been part of, not directly, but that. And I, anyway, let me finish this, and then I'll talk about after I got out, if that's okay.
Yeah, it's fine.
So I only got into Saigon once. I had a buddy that I worked with that he knew how to get a Jeep, and we were not supposed to be in Saigon because, as I said, it was not safe.
Okay.
So, but he manages to, so we had that archetypal Vietnam experience where you go to a bar and here's the girls, and they're the Vietnamese girls, and they speak a little bit of English, and they're trying to get you to buy more watered down drinks and
Yeah.
that kind of thing.
Yeah, yeah.
We didn't have any sex or anything like that, but we weren't 17 or 18 years old falling in love with a Vietnamese girl, a bar girl, you know.
Uh-huh.
But they had a tougher life than we did,
Right.
obviously, right? They were, and it wasn't, but that was my experience of Saigon, which was, I've been back a couple of times since then.
Uh-huh.
But the more important thing was that this whole army base, with 50,000 American troops, was run by Vietnamese labor.
Uh-huh.
So every day from Saigon, thousands and thousands of Vietnamese would come from Saigon to work on this base.
Mm-hmm.
And some of them were, they did all the shit work.
Mm-hmm.
They did a lot of the cooking and the cleaning.
Mm-hmm.
We all had in our, I call them hooches, they're like open air dormitories.
Yeah.
They were our maids. We had maids,
Mm-hmm.
and they would clean our. I mean, it was like I say, it was cushy. It wasn't just cushy at work.
Mm-hmm.
It was cushy, you know. And so, but these maids and these people who did the work in the kitchens,
Right.
They did all the shit work that the Americans didn't want to do.
Okay.
They would also bring marijuana cigarettes.
Mm-hmm.
So you could give your maid 2 cartons of Salem's.
Okay.
That was the first. And then the next day she would bring back 1 carton of Salem's. Except in the Salem's that she's bringing back,
Mm-hmm.
filters and everything looks just like new.
Mm-hmm.
It's all packed with very high quality weed.
Mm-hmm.
And increasingly, if you wanted it, with opium laced weed.
Mm-hmm.
OJs.
Okay.
And the guys got into heroin, and then they are when you get ready to go home,
Mm-hmm.
you buy these big Japanese speakers that you can get real cheap at the PX.
Yeah.
Take the back off,
Uh-huh.
pack it full of all this weed,
Yeah.
send it home. You could make tens of thousands of dollars on that stuff.
Okay.
And I'm sure a few people got caught, but
Yeah.
a lot of guys were doing it. I'm glad I wasn't doing it.
Right.
But I was married, and while I was I forgot to mention, while I was in Vietnam, my first child was born, my son.
Okay.
And so all I had gotten to see was pictures of him.
Right.
Got to talk to my wife while I was there. That was just because I worked in a message center.
Okay.
But I didn't see my son until I got back.
Right.
That scenario
Uh-huh.
perfectly repeated my father's experience with me.
Uh-huh.
I was born in August of 1944.
Right.
He was in World War II when I was born, and he didn't see me until 6 months after the end.
Right.
So I and my son had a very, we had, on the surface, it was a parallel experience.
Yeah.
Your son being first son, your first child,
Uh-huh.
being born while you're off in a combat zone.
Right.
Except everything else was completely different.
Right. I understand. I got you. I understand.
So
Uh-huh.
it was a disillusioning experience in the deepest sense. And it gradually turned my head around in the sense that I couldn't wait until I got out of the military. I wanted to get out of the military,
Okay.
go back to graduate school,
Uh-huh.
and learn this new field of film and media studies.
Right.
And I did that. But all of the stuff that I knew that I had been part of in the military
Right.
became something that I could not avoid. So when after I got out of the military, I attained my career goals.
Okay.
But my military experience gradually came back to me.
Mm-hmm. Where were you when you were separated?
When I was separated, I was at Fort Leavenworth, Kansas.
Okay.
And once again, that was probably had to do with my congressman and my father-in-law.
Well, they sent you back home.
Yeah.
Isn't that where you enlisted?
Exactly.
Is that where you enlisted?
No, I was from Emporia, which was like 100 miles away.
Yeah, okay. That's what I'm saying. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was part of course.
Yeah, it was not an
It
accident.
sent you home, you know.
Yeah. That was probably typical.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Military tries to do that, I
Yeah.
think.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, I was where they released me.
Did they send you home?
Yeah.
With
They
to home?
no. Well, yeah, in the Carolinas. Yeah, close to home. Back to Florida. You know, to see, you know. Yeah, so yeah.
Yeah.
All right,
Anyway,
so that was good.
so I was his clerk typist. I had a college degree.
So what did you do when you got out?
I went right back to graduate school.
Where?
Iowa, University of Iowa.
And majored in film studies?
Film and media studies.
Okay.
Yeah. Mhm.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay.
That was the fall of 1971.
Right. Did you keep a diary?
No.
Okay.
But I wrote a lot of letters.
Yes, I know you did afterwards, right?
Yeah.
After.
No, while I was in Vietnam.
Oh,
I
okay.
wrote on letters, yeah. But I don't think she saved any of those.
Oh, all right. All right. No, I meant a personal diary, not the
No, I
letters.
didn't keep a personal
Gotcha.
diary, no.
So what did you do when you got out? You went back to grad school
Right. Mhm.
and got your master's?
PhD.
Got your in film.
Yeah, film
Excellent.
and media studies, yeah.
I'm jealous. So anyway,
Yeah, we have a lot of similar interests, don't we?
yeah,
Which
apparently.
is some other point we have to have a conversation about.
Exactly, because this is your interview. And it's not about my experience, but I'm sitting here thinking about, and even I'd love to have more conversations
Yeah,
with you.
absolutely, definitely.
We'll do that. Did you use your GI Bill for your education?
Absolutely.
Okay, cool.
Yeah.
All right.
That made a big difference.
And close friends. Are you at all in touch with any of the close friends that you made in the service?
No.
Okay. All right. All right.
I wish I had. But
I understand.
But I've made friends with other people.
Who served?
Served.
Yeah, I got you. No, it's specific to any camaraderie experience in the military.
Right.
But I understand. Have you ever joined or belonged to still any veterans organizations?
Absolutely. Yeah. A few years after I got out of the military, I joined Vietnam Veterans Against the War.
Okay. Oh, okay. All right.
And then I still belong to that organization.
I hear
still
you.
support them. And then in the 90s, I joined, or the late 80s or the 90s, I joined a larger organization called Veterans for Peace, which is veterans all the way from World War II to today.
Right.
And yeah, so I'm active with them now.
Right. Okay. Couple more questions. So just give me the scenario, so to speak. You got your graduate and your PhD. You got your PhD, and then did you start teaching right away, or?
Yeah, that's when I got a job down here.
Okay.
I'd never even been to Florida when I got a job here in 1974.
Where?
At FAU.
At FAU, and you've been there since then.
Yeah.
Excellent. Okay. Now, last two questions. Did your military experience influence your thinking about war or the military in general?
Yeah. Well, I think I've probably answered that.
Yeah.
Definitely. I think I've probably already answered that.
All right. So, last question. How did your service and experiences affect your life? And you talked about that too, but
yeah, I don't know if I have a lot more to say. Just and I guess I would say that I love my country.
Okay.
At least as much as I did before I went into the military.
Right.
I just think of my country in a different way. It's a different kind of loyalty and patriotism than it was. When I was before I got drafted.
Okay.
Yeah, it is, and it's so funny because in some ways, going into the military, I felt was the worst thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah.
At the time,
Right.
I hated it,
Yeah.
but it was like, I can honestly say it's really what I needed. I needed a wake up call. I needed a reality check.
Right.
I needed somebody to say, "Hey, get out of the ivory tower and figure out what's going on in the real world."
Okay.
That's what happened. That's the way it worked for me.
Well, I want to thank you for your service, and I want to thank you for a great interview.
Was that good? I don't know. It seemed disjointed to me.
No, it was fine. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Good. I'm glad. I've told these stories to other people before, but I appreciate your listening.
Absolutely, my pleasure.